we finally have the patch notes for the upcoming Legacy of Phrecia event. Just in time as well, because we're now only 2 days away from launch, and I will note here that the launch is a day earlier than normal League start in case anyone had missed that. The event is starting on a Thursday night for me. So in this video I'm going to go over the biggest buffs and the biggest nerfs for the alternate ascendancy balance, beginning with the nerfs. And the Ancestral Commander is taking a pretty big hit here as expected. This was the second most played ascendancy in the last Phrecia event after all, and on top of that, the Ancestral Commander was also comfortably the most well-performing ascendancy in the 3.26 Gauntlet event that used the alternate ascendancies. Now, the largest nerf in this list of changes in terms of the generic power level of this ascendancy is likely the combined change to the survivability of this class as a result of both Ancestral Endurance and Ancestral Defiance losing 33% of their power. Ancestral Endurance will now provide 2 maximum endurance charges instead of 3, whilst the recovery from Ancestral Defiance, which is the built-in mini Defiance of Destiny, that's going to now recover 10% of missing unreserved life before being hit, down from 15%. These changes together will make Ancestral Commander feel a bit squishier overall, but it's still going to be quite a strong defensive ascendancy even with those changes. Meanwhile, there are 2 other very important changes here as well. Firstly, the Call of the Ancestors notable is now going to do the exact opposite of what it used to do. Instead of granting a huge amount of Warcry cooldown recovery rate and imposing slower Warcry speed, it will now do the opposite, granting a massive amount of increased Warcry speed and slowing Warcry recovery rate. This is a big change because a lot of the Ancestral Commander builds were using slams utilising auto exertion with a decent investment into attack speed, and this meant that they were able to benefit from very good uptime on exertions, even on Warcries with low exert count such as Intimidating Cry. And they were able to almost entirely ignore the downside of slower Warcry speed because most of their Warcries were automated. But this is completely changing in the upcoming Phrecia event, because now this node will provide a giant Warcry speed boost instead, whilst also slowing Warcry cooldowns, so it's no longer useful with auto exertion. This is now a Warcry piano notable. You can use this with manual cast Warcries, and Warcry skills already have some Warcry speed baked into the skill as they level up, which is a 38% increase at level 20, and you're likely to be leveling up the skills now as well, because if you're manually casting them, you want to also benefit from their buffs. But the 200% increased speed here, combined with the baked-in speed on the skill, will bring that 0.8 second use time down to just 0.24 seconds. So you'll have very fast Warcry activations, but I still don't expect Warcry piano slammers to be all that popular in this upcoming event. Now there's also another very big change here to do with the Strike branch, which has improved the extra targets on Ancestral Reach to 2, up from 1. But this notable is also swapping places with Ancestral Echo. This is a modifier that's quite awkward to use because you need to move a certain distance before this is enabled. So now you'll need to spend 4 points for the additional strike targets, where before this was quite a good investment for 2 points on most strike builds. Now at 4 points, it's only really going to be good if you can make good use of Ancestral Echo, which is going to make this branch unusable for most builds. Next up in the biggest losers is the Scavenger, and just like with the Ancestral Commander, it's no surprise to see this one here, especially considering this was the most played ascendancy in the last Phrecia event. Unlike with the Ancestral Commander, however, the Scavenger is at least seeing a bit of push and pull here, with a handful of smaller buffs amongst the nerfs. Cloak of Flame was the most used notable by Scavengers in the previous event, being picked up on 70% of characters, which is wild. But this was just such an effective defensive node to boost physical mitigation, providing the basis to fairly easily access a very high amount of physical damage taken as elemental. But in this event it's being nerfed from 40% down to 30% physical damage taken as fire. Now even though this is a very big nerf, it's still an extremely good node. It will be harder now to reach 100% physical damage shift, but still possible thanks to the Bound by Destiny Jewel, an item that didn't exist in the last Phrecia event. But realistically, most builds do not need to push to 100% shift. This node combined with Cloak of Flame and an Eldritch Implicit Helmet will already provide 76% or more, which is still very strong defensively, but your max physical damage hit is going to be hurt a bit by this change. Now, whilst the most picked notable on the Scavenger in the last event was Cloak of Flame, the second most popular node was an offensive one, Void Battery, which is taking a very big hit here. Previously, this granted 25% increased spell damage per power charge, and it will now grant just 15%, so that's quite a large damage nerf to power charge stacking setups. Those builds will be losing around 100% or 120% increased damage on average. However, I will note that a handful of the buffs that this ascendancy is receiving alongside those nerfs may open up some new interesting build potential. For example, the 5 maximum summon Raging Spirits. That's quite interesting with the transfigured version of SRS, a skill which normally only has a maximum of 6 summons. Now, the third and final biggest loser for this video is the Blind Prophet, with just a single line in the patch notes. The base crit override for weapons is being lowered from 12% to 9%. That's quite a substantial change, and once again is another one to be expected following the popularity of this ascendancy in the previous event. So you'll need to invest a bit more into critical strike chance scaling to cap out your crit, but this class is overall going to feel very much the same. It will still cater to the same types of builds, and you'll just need to remove a bit of investment elsewhere to go into crit instead. Okay, let's move on to the biggest winners, and surprisingly, this patch was actually mostly buffs to many of the ascendancies. And at the top of the buff list, it has to be the Bog Shaman, or the Bog Witch, as many like to call this ascendancy. This one is receiving some huge buffs. Firstly, the small nodes no longer grant Curse Effect, and instead grant 4% increased maximum life each. Considering this is a life stacking ascendancy for most builds, this is a big buff, especially since the ascendancy itself provides massive access to flat life from Sanguine Power, making Energy Shield on equipped armor items be gained as life instead. Felfen is also losing the line that makes your Chaos Resistance 0, now allowing you to benefit from the Chaos Resistance granted by the small nodes, which is a nice change. But the biggest buffs to this ascendancy are the next two changes. Vile Imprecations is a node that makes nearby enemies have Malediction, a generically good debuff to have access to, making them take 10% increased damage and deal 10% reduced damage. But this node also used to grant a small amount of reduced reservation efficiency for Curse Auras, which wasn't really used all that much because Blasphemy at the moment isn't very good. This part of the node is going away, and in its place, you'll now just gain an extra maximum curse. That is wild. That's now one of the best generic ascendancy notables in Phrecia. You can pick up this on pretty much any build on the Bog Shaman and it's going to be very effective, either as a big damage boost using an extra offensive curse, or even defensively using Temporal Chains or Enfeeble. But that's not all, because Toad Pact is also being changed to lean even more into the trade-off style of this class. It will now impose an even heavier downside of minus 40% to all elemental resistances, but you'll now get a ridiculous 75% increase to projectile speed, area of effect, and skill effect duration. Those are just absurd numbers. Notably, this node as an early ascendancy option is now going to be much more difficult to utilize due to the nasty minus resistance modifier. But if and when you're able to overcome that downside, those upside modifiers are quite strong indeed. Next up in the biggest winners is the Aristocrat. Now I have to say that this ascendancy is just starting to look insane at this point. The attribute stacking nodes will now provide a 40% increase to their respective stat, up from 30%, and then the notable behind those nodes will now grant 8% increased damage per 5 of your lowest attribute. You can stack that with the Mastery and the Cyclopean Coil for 10% increased damage per 5 of your lowest attribute, which is very, very strong. You're going to be able to solve your increased damage pretty much entirely through just stacking attributes, somewhat similar to life stacking with Wrathpith Globe. Now it must be noted here that you cannot take all 3 attribute nodes, and the one behind them, because the Aristocrat must path through this first notable, Inherited Fortune. Therefore, you only have 6 points to spend thereafter, so you're going to be taking 2 of the 40% increased stats and the tri-attribute stacking node, so you will have to bolster your stats to that third attribute to keep up with the others for that damage payoff, but just generally speaking, this is incredibly powerful. Items like Ascendancies are going to provide a massive power boost fairly early into progression, and you're open to playing quite a few different builds too if you go for this kind of setup. Now lastly, for the biggest winners, we of course have the Behemoth, which did in the end have the disabled spells restriction removed, but it then gained new modifiers on this node, which disable the usage of Warcries and aura skills. This puts Behemoth in a very interesting position. It's not going to be used for slam builds because it can't use Warcries, but it does still have Rampage, which is incredibly strong, and it still has a few interesting angles for builds. Notably, the aura restriction on Rampager means that you cannot use typical aura skills like Determination, but you also can't make use of Flesh and Stone as that has an aura tag. And there's also Smite that you can't use because that also has an aura tag. You can use non-aura spells though, so that means you can now use Blood Rage on this ascendancy, you can use Frostblink and Flame Dash, you can use Guard skills, you can use Arctic Armor and Tempest Shield and Herald skills and Aspect skills. This is quite a big buff despite the restrictions of being unable to use Warcries, which pushes the Behemoth towards less generic build archetypes. The Rage branch was buffed, with the increased rage cost of skills being removed from Fueled by Hate. So this is pretty much just a Hate Forge now, and together with the existence of the Chaos Bloodline and the Triumvirate Authority Ring, there's some potential there for builds such as Vile Lightning Strike. The Fortify stacking route is still there and was unchanged as well, but the rarity and therefore the cost of the Celestial Brace makes this a less desirable option. Now on the other side of the Ascendancy, the Mental Conditioning node is getting a huge buff. It will now grant 8 mana per 4 strength, literally doubling its scaling compared to the last event. This node also grants Power of Purpose, which converts 80% of your mana into twice as much armor. So you're going to be able to obtain a lot more armor, and this combined with the fact that you can make use of skills like Arctic Armor will make this Ascendancy feel a lot stronger defensively. Now I should also make an honourable mention here at the end of this video for the Daughter of Oshabi, which also received a handful of buffs and other good changes, such as the Spellslinger node being decoupled from the other one node, as these pretty much had no synergy when used together. So now you'll be able to play a Spellslinger build if you want to, without losing 2 extra Ascendancy points. And that's important because of Bloodline classes, perhaps the most notable being the All Bloodline for Precursor's release, which grants bonuses if you have gear pieces with no socketed gems, and can be combined with the buffed Oath of the Magi on the Daughter of Oshabi to gain even more bonuses. So overall, there was quite a lot of unexpected buffs in these changes for the Phrecia Ascendancies, and I think we're going to see a lot more Ascendancy diversity and build diversity in this event compared to the last as a result. But what are your thoughts on these changes? Are you looking forward to the Legacy of Phrecia event? Let me know by commenting below. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.